It was kind of not meant to be. There was the Gulf War, and my work had kind of slowed down because of the Gulf War, and I was working mostly with members of the Kuwaiti ruling family. And I had been wanting to write anyway. And I was planning to write a book on collecting because I was a collector and I collected without much money. And I wanted to write about people like me who put together interesting collections without having like enormous funds. And my literary agent, introduced me to a Lebanese friend. And they started talking about cookbooks. And as I was listening to them, I was thinking, why not write a Lebanese cookbook? Because there weren't any user-friendly for people who weren't very familiar with the cuisine. And I kind of, like this, said, well, maybe I should write a cookbook. A Lebanese cookbook. And my agent said, how funny, there's a publisher who's looking for somebody to do that. And I said, I'm your person. And that's how it started. Of course, at that time, I didn't know much about cookbooks, recipe writing, etc. So my agent introduced me to people. She was the daughter of a very eminent food writer. And she took me to a symposium, the Oxford Symposium of Food and Cookery, and introduced me to a lot of food writers. And then I chose a few mentors, and I started talking to them, and I started buying cookbooks and reading cookbooks. And then I wrote the proposal, which took a lot longer than I thought it would take. And then the book, which took even longer than I thought. And fortunately, the book was very well received, and I enjoyed the work, so I carried on. Well, food is very important in the life of everybody. And it's a wonderful way to enter into the life of people and to know the country in a different way. Not like when I travel for food, I'm not just looking at, historic sites, whatever. I'm talking to everybody, I'm getting to know people. You go into people's homes, you see how they live. Everything that's related to food is related to culture. The way people shop, prepare the food, eat together. It brings everything. It's a kind of way of life that people ignore normally. And it's very important to the history of the country, to the history of the people, to the social context, family life, interactions with people in general, the celebrations, the feasts, during Ramadan. So all this gives you an insight into the life of a people, and the way to the country as well, the culture of the country. My mother is a great cook. And she was incredibly important in my starting to appreciate good food and learning about cooking, because I was always in the kitchen with her and with my grandmother. And I learned an awful lot from her. And when I decided to write my Lebanese cookbook, she was a fount of knowledge. And she gave me all her recipes to start with, and a lot of information about the foodways of the Lebanon, the preservation of produce, what people did, before refrigeration and before easy transport, how they had meat for the winter, how they preserved the meat for the winter, how they dried vegetables, and everything that is called mouni in Arabic, which is the preserves for the winter months. My role, the purpose of my work is to preserve traditional recipes and culinary lore and culinary history to pass on to future generations. So every book I write, my purpose is to present a collection of traditional recipes and make them easy for people to reproduce. So they're written in such a way that they're very precisely written so that people can use them, not just read them and learn about them. And to put the recipe in a social context or a historical context, or just anecdotal, put anecdotes so that it comes alive and people are inspired to learn about the food and to cook it.
Right.
I was very fortunate when I used to spend time in Kuwait, because my friends, who were the daughters of Sheikh Abadiyya, had 3 cooks: a Persian cook, an Indian cook, and a Lebanese cook. And I stayed with them in their home, and they had the nannies. And every morning I would meet with their nannies and say, what are we going to eat today? Are we going to have like bardalof, which is a wonderful Kuwaiti rice cake? Or are we going to have tabbouleh or kibbeh? Or are we going to have a pilau and a khoresht and something? So I learned a lot about Kuwaiti food and also about Iranian food, which in those days was not so well known. And of course the Lebanese food I knew very well. And they were very generous with their time, with their house, with everything, and were very happy to let me kind of dominate the kind of the culinary discussions of the daily meals. When I was young, I started reading French existentialists, and I started dreaming of being a kind of, growing up in Lebanon, it wasn't obvious to be liberated, I was supposed to get married and produce children, so my dream for my life was totally different. And I wanted to be like Simone de Beauvoir, or, a writer, independent, not having to look after any babies or husband or whatever. And one of the things that was important for me was the cooking. I mean, I watched my mother cook every day for us, which we loved because we loved her food. But I didn't want to be like her, and I didn't want to cook for a family on a daily basis. And in fact, I didn't want to cook at all in those days. So when I moved to London, and I was with my partner, and the first thing I said, don't expect me to cook for you. I'm not cooking meals on a daily basis. And then I realized later, when I decided to cook for dinner parties, that in fact food is culture. And actually I realized that when I started to write about food more than when I started. Initially I would cook to entertain and to receive, for hospitality basically, which is very much part of our culture. We're very hospitable, and the first thing we give people who visit us is food and drink. And so I cooked for that purpose. And then when I started writing about food, I realized that there was a lot more to just cooking, learning about the food, its history and everything. And so I stopped viewing it as a sort of gender trap, being domesticated, and more like something which is very interesting. What's happening in Syria is very tragic, and of course Aleppo is half destroyed, and the souks, which were the most enchanting souks of the whole Middle East, are practically gone. There is nothing much left. The interesting thing, and probably the only positive that has come out of the Syrian tragedy, is with the spread of refugees around the world and women using their natural talent, cooking talent, to earn money because they need to earn money. People are much more aware of the richness of Syrian cuisine, and in fact much more aware of Syrian cuisine in general and how rich it is. So, but on the other hand, with people spread all over the globe, you have a risk of losing some culinary traditions. So you have, on the whole, it's a situation where you worry about culinary traditions disappearing or at risk of being lost. And on the other hand, you have Syrian people everywhere introducing people who don't know Syrian cuisine to Syrian cuisine.